This is the Dope Black Dad podcast. My name is Marvin Harrison. Today, we're in a very somber mood, or I am specifically in a somber mood. We have had a lot to reflect on. We have seen a sheer monumentous amount of outpouring for the Black experience. And on one hand, I'm happy and impressed that many people have come out of the shadows to support Black lives. But on another hand, I really, really wish that we didn't have to be here having this conversation. Ironically, our platform being set up to provide voices for Black fathers, we've become a centerpiece of what the conversation is about. We've been driving the conversation across BBC, the Telegraph, all sorts of different platforms. And now I think we're coming together to have our conversation about what the last 10 days has been like, but also what we hope the future looks like. And just to recap for anybody who may have been living on a wonderful island where this isn't important, the last 3 weeks has consisted of, we already are in I call it in stages. So the 1.0 is that we've been in COVID and we've had restriction on our movement, and as is everybody. So that's the 1.0. It's very traumatic. One day the government just said, you can't go out, and we had to make it work. That's the 1.0. The 2.0 is Black people have disproportionately been impacted by contracting and dying from COVID. So that's a huge thing in our community, being surrounded by constant passing away, RIP messages, funerals that you can't attend and you can't be present to. People that you know in mourning and not being able to support them in the way that you normally would, but with your presence. And so we've gone into this digital mode of like Zoom 9 nights and Zoom memorials, which is it doesn't do the same thing. So that's the like layer 2. Layer 3 is that even for the people who have been in lockdown, there has been an increase in the amount of people who are fined and arrested from the Black community. So we are way over indexing on arrests and fine. And if you're already under financial pressure and you're being fined for being outside, or you're being confronted and harassed by the police who are looking to see if you are, I don't know, selling drugs or just out illegally. And we have a advisor to the government who has just gone out and driven 500 miles to Durham, and then another 100 miles round trip on a trip to see a castle for his wife's birthday. And he's had no form of anything, no form of punishment, no consequence for his actions. So we live in a world where the divide is extremely clear. And then even beyond that, so this is now what we level 4. So level 4 is you open up your phone and you see a vision of a man jogging in Georgia. And although it happened in January, it came to our attentions in March and April. And we see this man who's jogging in Georgia be driven down by a former police officer and his son, and he's pulled over and then ultimately dies at the hands of those men. I also refused to watch the video, so I cannot give you a more descriptive version of what has happened. I refuse to watch it. So that's a level 4. Then level 5, which is like a week later, we see a white woman in a park who is using a man's racial identity and weaponizing it against him to call on the police because she has decided not to put her dog on a leash when walking in a park when it has been said and known to be doing so. So an innocent man is now being potentially threatened with his life when he has to interact with the police when he has no reason or need to do so. And so we have now seen how white women and white people in general can and have, over a period of time, weaponized the police authority against us. And seeing that firsthand is very sobering, because ultimately we always felt like this was something that was in our imaginations a little bit, and some people might deny it and some people might be like, can't be that bad. But when you watch it and watch how she shrieks at the top of her voice, this African-American man is bothering me, and you just like, you know what that response is going to elicit. And then finally, our level 5, was it 6? I've lost count of how many levels we've got through now, but this is the depth of the oppression and the depth of strength that we are in our community upholding, is we now see that George Floyd has been killed at the hands of police. He has died because a police officer has decided that he's going to suppress his knee into the back of his neck while he's holding down for 8.5 minutes, and so he couldn't breathe, and ultimately he would pass away. And we get to see that all on camera. Again, I haven't watched that video because I refuse to, but understanding the events by the testimonies of people around me and the pictures is pretty clear. We are today joined by Dexter, Stephen, and Michael. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I'm just going to go to Michael first. Michael, can you give a insight into what your experience has been in the last few weeks and where you are with all the things that have happened?
It's been quite an emotional roller coaster because I felt all the emotions. The reason why is because I have, when I saw the Ahmad, when I saw the Brianna, when I saw the Amy, it was like in the period of maybe 2 or 3 months, then leading up to the most recent weeks, the different facets of racism. And every time one person got killed, it was, oh, but then he was stealing. Ahmad went into a house that wasn't his and was looking around. Then Amy, Amy Cooper, oh, but he said, I would do something if you're not going to do something. So it's all these different variations of racism that I feel and have experienced, all happened within sort of 2 or 3 weeks. And it was quite emotional. What the other two adjectives I'll use is, one thing is that I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged by the conversation because for 2 reasons. One is from the white community, is that for the first time I've seen a outpouring or a significant group effort to understand race, which is made up, but racism, which is not made up, and bring the two together. And I mean, I'm inundated with messages saying, what can I read? What can I watch? What can I listen to? And what's funny, for the past 4 years, I've been doing a lot of anti-racist work, a lot of the time through education and trying to get people that have studied, that know what they're talking about, to explain race and racism and what actions people can do about it, how we can progress as a people, but also as a human race. But what's interesting is that when other people died before that, this outpouring wasn't there. When I look at the protests, I'm seeing a lot of white people and them visibly scared by police. That's a new thing for me. And I've lived in Mississippi, so I understand what the Deep South really is like, black people and white people. And then the other reason why I'm encouraged, because it's not to bring division amongst the black community, but some of my black conservative friends, the ones that are center-right, leaning more right, they're now posting on Facebook saying, Black Lives Matter. And I'm like, bruv, where were you during the elections?
Yeah.
The guy who had a whole manifesto for black and ethnic minority / global majority groups. I haven't never seen a conservative group, bring out a whole manifesto just for us, saying these are the things that are going to end white supremacy and systems that are designed to make us lose, proactively designed to make us lose. So I'm seeing all these things. And then I also feel vindicated because as a black professional, as a person that was in anti-racist work, because I haven't seen a lot of support from people that look like me, people that don't look like me. Often I'm lying in bed saying, am I wasting my time? Am I wasting my time doing this work? People aren't interested. It's not important. Yeah. So those are the emotions I'm feeling right now, but it's still in a state of flux, to be honest.
Stephen, how are you feeling? And I think it'd be nice to charter the feelings that you went through at the different stages of the things that we discussed, or just in general, just how are you?
Okay, today I'm quite positive. I just did a IG live about anxiety around the kids going back to school, and it was quite positive. So I'm feeling quite upbeat. In terms of where we are, it depends on the time of day. I can get up in the morning and I'm consumed by everything that's going on around me, and I have to then take a mind break to reset myself.
Yeah.
And I'm having to do that more and more. And when I'm doing some kind of mindset or just checking myself, I'm finding it hard to focus. So I know that because I'm finding it hard to focus, I'm in a difficult place like most people, because if you're doing meditation and you're all over the place, that's your body telling you that you're in a state of flux. So I've noticed that more. I'm finding it a lot more harder to focus and to concentrate and just to stay grounded. So there's a lot of things that are going on right now to everybody that's making things a little bit more difficult. And we need to be mindful of the fact that that's what's happening. So we're going to be slightly more agitated. We're going to be a lot more anxious. And we need to at least acknowledge that, we're in a very pivotal time in terms of the things that are going in the world. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We've lost a lot of people close to us. We've seen in the last 2 weeks people being publicly executed, a man being, a woman calling the police just because of the color of his skin. And that's something that's happened to all of us. It's visceral, How many times have you spoken to a white woman and she's not followed an instruction or just not listened to you? How disempowering is that?
But what does that do to you, though, to have this idea that we all know it? What, like, that's not fair, though, is it?
It leaves you hollow. It's almost like you don't exist. I've done security for many, many years, and the amount of instructions I've had to give to white women and being completely ignored or just looked through, even though it's a job. All I'm doing is giving you instruction, and it clearly says it on that board or that wall that you need to follow that instruction. They'll just look at you like you're not even there. And you know what that's about. That's just a power dynamic. Like you can't tell me what to do because you're black. That's in layman terms. And it's a horrible feeling knowing that still in the age that we're living in, you're treating me like I'm on a plantation. That's what it feels like. That's why I could understand when she said she'll call the police, I completely understood how every black person would feel, especially as black males, because we are perceived even more as a danger because of our physicality.
Yeah. Dexter, what would your message be to the people who are not sure that this is a real thing and this is happening? The all lives matter people, the people who are kind of looking over the fence at it. What would you say what would your message to them be?
I don't think I've got a message for them. It's if I can explain it. One of the things we kind of touched upon just before we jumped on was that there are a number of white people that we knew or perhaps didn't know, but that reached out to us to ask questions and wanting to genuinely understand. And the reason why I say I wouldn't have a message for certain people is because a lot of the time, even friends of mine, well-meaning, good-hearted people, completely oblivious to their own racism because they don't perceive what they're saying as being racist. So they'll say something like, "I'm not racist. I hate your culture. I can't stand the ideas of the men from where the country you're from, and I just your attitude to life and your behavior. I don't even want to interact with your culture."
So then, because those people are in the position of power, we've had MPs who have received requests to support Black Lives Matter, and they've responded and said they have no affinity to the movement or the people and those protesters, very much othering them. Those people matter. They're not just like Sally from Wiltshire. These are people in power that we're supposed to be having our lives in their control or representing us as a constituents. It's deeper than just ignoring them, isn't it?
I don't see it as ignoring them, but it's like asking me to have a conversation with Donald Trump. I'm not the person to have that conversation. You need somebody far better than I to have a conversation with that individual. I don't have the capacity, I don't have the knowledge, I don't have the bandwidth, I don't have the dexterity. That's somebody else is far better suited to have that conversation than I am.
But who is that person? We don't have a nominated Donald Trump spokesperson. Who is the person that's going to speak to a Donald Trump, Boris Johnson, Priti Patel, Nick Ferrari, all those people who constantly talk about our experience in a negative way? Who should be speaking to them?
If it's going to be a one-on-one or a forum or that type of thing, it'll be those people who I would say kind of engage in those spaces on a regular basis. So somebody like Akala would be far better suited than I would. You know, even when I listen to some of the Dope Black Dads who get on radio stations, etc., and they talk, it's wonderful, eloquent, very intelligent points. You know, they manage the situation very well. And truthfully, if I'd been asked the same questions as they were being asked, I honestly wouldn't have an answer at the time.
Cool. Michael.
Oh, so much to say, but I'll try and keep it brief. Just the first comment to say, just, you know, Stephen's experience. He talked about the police and Amy Cooper. That is an experience that almost every Black person goes through. I remember when I was younger, my raving times in Romford. Time and envy. The mans that know, they know.
2 weeks ago, I bet you.
One of them ones, yeah. I think I was 15 years old. No, I think 15. And I was there, and you know, I didn't drink at the time. I love music, so I was dancing. And I remember my white friend was trying to chat with this girl, and he went and told this white girl that I'm going to bottle her. Out the blue. She went and told the bouncer, and I got hauled into that special corridor and roughed up a little bit, interrogated, saying, I heard you're going to bottle her. I was like, bruv, I had never, ever seen this girl or spoken to that girl. Like, I'm in my own space, dancing, do what I'm doing. Why would I do it? And I even said the words, I even go to church. Like,
you're chlorine for anything. I'm a different type of Black guy. I read. I don't know anything.
And that taught me, and there've been a few moments in my life when you realize that I always thought of myself as African, but I realized I was Black. Do you know what I'm saying?
Wow. What does that mean to you? That's the thing. I'm going to be really honest here. Is very often Africans keep serving us. And I appreciate there was a genuine time where the Caribbean diaspora were very unkind to African people for a short period of time in their lives. Not very long. And I am very clear that I feel like Africans people hold the I'm African, like the mantle over Blackness in such a way. So could you explain the difference for the people who were kinder to you in primary school?
Sure. And it's a much bigger conversation. I mean, we've got only a few minutes. I'll try and break it down. But the way I see it is that when you ask an African, are you Black? They're like, no, I'm African, I'm Igbo, I'm Ga, I'm Ashanti, I'm Kikuyu. Do you see what I'm saying? There is a cultural legacy, a historical capital that comes with I'm African or Kikuyu or whatever. It's only when you come in relation to either a light-skinned Arab or an Indian or Asian person or a Far Eastern Asian person or whiteness, then you realize you're Black. And whiteness is not necessarily a color. It's about access to human rights, the ability to give, to give a testimony in court against a white person, to own land, to have a job, to give your financial heritage to your children, inheritance. All these things is what makes people human, allows, it's a resource that every human being needs to survive. Those basic ingredients. Yeah. And Blackness has been seen as, in a way, has always been seen as inhuman, and therefore we are always striving for those access to those basic resources. And Blackness is an invention not created by Black people. We didn't have a convention to say, okay, we're going to call ourselves Black, and this is what it means. It's a code of conduct. We're going to do this on Sunday, this on Saturday. No, it was just you're of dark hue, you have melanin. And so therefore, when you're Black, it actually, for me, is like you're floating in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. You're not secure to anything. And I was listening to, I really recommend a book that really for me highlights it very well. It's called The History of White People by Nell Painter. And it's not about blackness, it's about the history of this concept of whiteness and Caucasianness. Where did it come from? Why is Europeans that are nowhere near the Caucasus Mountains called Caucasians? That's something we have to ask ourselves. Do you see what I'm saying? Why does it automatically make you good?
Do you have a sentence as to why? What did they invent or?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it was some German and English philosophers and scientists, Blumenbach, that created it. And they basically is all a way of showing how Anglo-Saxons became the top of the white pyramid or hierarchy. They went through top institutions like Harvard, went through trying to prove through IQ tests, all these different kind of things, that Anglo-Saxons, the top you can be in whiteness. And people that were the lowest were people like the Jews, the Irish. If you read how they talk about the Irish, the Italians, bruv, you think they're talking about black people. But
so are you saying that the Jews, Irish have equal footing in terms of the experience that they have faced? So then what's happened in that sense? If that has been a big project of theirs to diminish Jews, Irish, and black people, why does that not impact them in the same way today? So is it our fault?
No, what I would say is that what was a response of Jews and Italians and Spanish people to being disrespected and said to be inferior. What they did was they tried to prove that they are white.
Right.
Black people can never do that. You can look in a book. There was a Japanese and a Sikh man from India that went to the US Supreme Court and were arguing in Supreme Court saying that they are real Caucasians. One, because the Indians are close to the Caucasus Mountains, closer than Europeans. So he went to the Supreme Court to argue his cases. I should be access to whiteness. I should be able to access to opportunities that whiteness people have. Wow. And then the Japanese says, I'm white. I'm light-skinned, bruv. So let me be in the whiteness club. So this is what I'm saying. It's not about race. It's about access to opportunity. And that's what blackness has therefore become. So I'll give you an example, yeah? Growing up, I'm sure a lot of people realize this. If you look at the adjectives associated with whiteness, you know, it's usually to put a negative adjective to highlight, you know, the negative of white people. You know, I was in America, people used to call people, oh, he's white trash. I'm like, what makes him that? I don't understand. But then with black, but if you say white, you automatically in your head think of something, you know, it's whiteness, it's good, it's proper, it's holy, it's innocent, it's pure, all that kind of stuff. And therefore you very, very rarely see, oh, he's a good white man. Like you're saying, from the white community or whatever. Whereas in black people, bro, the basics, when I was in that stairwell, I was like, I'm a good black man. Because blackness was automatically seen as a negative, inferior thing to be or to have.
So is this what I'm trying to get down to is like, in layman terms, is this our doing in terms of how we've responded to it? Is it how it's been created and we are the consequence of it? How do you characterize the actual impact of us being in this imaginary world of whiteness?
I think so. Marcus Garvey wrote a book was written about Marcus Garvey called Race First. So Marcus Garvey always talks about race first. We live in a world where, unfortunately, race is the first identifier, your first identity that gives you access to things. Do you know what I'm saying? That is what the system that was created. That's why you look in the world, in UK today, 45% of black children live in poverty, 40% of black people live in poverty, one of the highest rates in the UK. Why is that? Do you see my point? So there's obviously a system in place that has created this and is proactively creating this. So my thing for black people is that we have to, we're so focused on not being black first. We'll be Catholic, we'll be light-skinned, we'll be educated, we'll be Christian, we're Muslim, and not realizing that we are black first. Now we have to understand, what does that mean? And what are the things we need to do in our daily lives in order to empower blackness, so it actually creates opportunity for us to be thriving all the time rather than surviving. Do you know what I'm saying?
Stephen and Dexter, does that make sense to you? Are you with this idea that we're being presented with?
Kind of. You know, we're not even. You know, I think we're the only group on the planet that are defined by a color that we're not. We're not even black, unless you come from South Sudan or, you know, Nubian, and, you know, they're more like navy blue. Most black people are a shade of brown. Now, how did we become black? And who decided that? You know, that's my question. And it's a question that a lot of black kids ask me.
Well, black was definitely created. It included African Aboriginals, the original
Yeah.
Aboriginals. I think at one point it included South Asia as well, and they were
Yeah.
considered black. And then they've obviously negotiated their way out of it, and then somehow they've been thrown back into BAME, and then they've negotiated themselves out of that as well. So, you know, it seems like we're alone in all forms of minority and othering. What happens now? But also, just like, how does that feel to know that everyone's trying their best to get as far away from your likeness as possible? What does that do to you?
Well, it's all I've ever known. So it's not like it's some new phenomenon. You know, I've walked into a room and people, you know, they kind of move away from you, or those little micro, you know, the micro stuff. Like you go to a cash point and the white person might say, "Oh, you can go ahead, mate, go on. I'm just waiting for someone." Or a woman might catch a bag, and that used to happen when I was young, when mugging was like the real deal. You know, that happens to me
So
now.
who would you have been if you didn't have this experience? What would you have come? How's that shaped you?
It's made me double guess myself. You know, what's his name? W.E.D. Du Bois
Boys,
said that. You
W the
know,
boy.
yeah, the double consciousness thing where you have to second guess how people react towards you, which leaves us in a state of like always guessing, you know, always making ourselves smaller, you know, always having to talk a certain way, always having to placate people, you know, always making ourselves feel like we're not you know, this is what we are, you know, this is how we've been made, but yet we have to define ourselves by other people's definition. And for our young kids, that's a real problem.
Yeah. So
It's
who
a
would
real
you have
problem.
been? Who would you have been? What type of man would you be? What choices did you decide not to take, or what choices did you differ on and ultimately not act upon because you were in your own mind?
Maybe when I went for a job and I had to think about, did I not get that job because I wasn't qualified, or did I not get that job because I was black? You know, did that person say something subliminal that I just missed, or was it just something in my head? You know, did that teacher take that young person out of the class because they were black and they were behaving like young black men or women do? The mannerisms are very different, and because you didn't understand that culturally, you just took it as a sign of aggression. You know, and I'm having to talk to them about things they have no understanding of. You know, why am I having to make myself look small? Why am I having to change the way I talk or not be animated? This is just how I am, you
Okay.
know. And it's a
Dexter,
real problem for them.
You're a graduate of the same coaching courses I've been on. What
Yeah.
is this real? Is this us in our own head, not acting powerfully and moving forward? And that's what the problem is. So if we all decide to live in our own outside of our own heads and live in the world on the court, as they would say, would we get rid of this psychosis?
And you know, it's interesting because I'm 100% relating to what's being said, but I have a slight slant on it. So the way I framed it in my mind was that when I'm with my parents, I've got one behavior. When I'm outside the house with my parents, there's another behavior. And with my friend, there's another behavior. So building up the catalog of behaviors suited to different environments became a skill set, even though it is the double guessing, but then it was, because it's framed as a skill set, it was how good am I? So each time I performed well, in my mind, it was the development or the further development of a skill. You know, that so the fluidity to shift from one space to another space to another space and navigate outcomes that you're trying to, you know, procure for yourself or those that you love. So, but then at the same time, I totally get what's being said. So when you ask the question, who would you be if you hadn't had to do those things? I actually think that's really powerful because it's something that I'm only now really embracing, I would say.
So if we say that if the consequence of you being inauthentic with your parents. You're pretending to be a church boy, as Michael alluded to earlier, when in reality you're out doing the bogle behind women's
I don't call that
bottoms.
inauthentic. I don't think that's inauthentic. If the policeman comes and asks me a question, I'll give him sufficient information to answer the question and leave out anything that I don't deem necessary. I call that intelligent. I don't think it's inauthentic.
But is it inauthentic to tell your mum that you are someone else and be smaller in front of your mum, larger in front of your friends, in the middle when you're by yourself, and then you present yourself? And also, it's not even just the idea that you change; it's the consequence of your changing. So if your authentic self, even if you say you are authentic, but you just ultimately changing into a new character, if your mum sees you with in your friend's energy, what's the worst that's going to happen? She might clap you around the head and she might send you home, but she's still going to be your mum and love you. What's the impact of being around the proximity to whiteness at work and then being caught with your jerk chicken fried dumpling, your hair braided into potentially going into dreadlocks, you saying patois to some of your friends, your last name is not something that they can pronounce? What's the impact for those things?
Right. I think that this is going to be about how it's framed, because I think there's appropriate behavior and there's inappropriate behavior. So I don't think that when I get on all fours and make funny sounds to convince my children to eat their food, that I'm being less than myself or mitigating who I actually am. I don't think that's a case of not being authentic. I think that's just, you don't have, I mean, authenticism isn't about your ability to vomit who you are on anyone at any time and they should just accept it. You know, I think when you're being authentic about yourself, it's how you choose to express yourself at that moment in time. So, I mean,
isn't the ability to choose a really important part of that? I choose to be on my all fours and feed my children. I don't choose to anglicize my way of speaking and change my first and last name to appease a hiring manager. I don't want to choose to do that. I have to do that. Otherwise, I will not be making a career choice or career move or buying a house like I want to. Isn't the right to choose a fundamental point of it, part of it?
Well, I think you have a valid point in that, but I still believe that that's not the entirety of the narrative, because you choose. Look, it's like saying, I don't want to be a smooth, when I want to approach a woman that I think is wonderful or a man that I think is wonderful, and I want to get to know them better, and I approach that situation with a desired outcome to exchange numbers or details, or to just be able to sit down and talk to them to get to know them a little bit better, or whatever the case may be. I'm going to adapt my presentation in order to elicit a response that's going to lead me in a direction that I want to go in. Now, if somebody says that's being inauthentic, I think there are definitely going to be cases when that's true. Look, my name is Dexter Dash, so I didn't have a challenge of having a name that was something that would ostracize me. It was quite the opposite.
So you're privileged then? You're a privileged black man.
I think I'm completely privileged. I'm privileged because not only am I black, but I know that they love the fact that I'm black. They just have a difficult time admitting it and digesting it. But that's really not my problem. So when we're talking about various things where we enter different environments and people are going to respond to us in a certain way, well, I could sit there and get upset with it. I can decide that I'm going to use that for my own personal benefit.
So are you saying that we just have a chip on our shoulder? They're going to treat us how they're going to treat us. We can get over it. It's not that big of a deal. All the challenges that we're facing are resolvable with an adjustment to our mental attitude.
No, I'm saying that we also have an opportunity to add an ingredient to the meal.
And what is the meal? Just for clarity, is the meal whiteness? Is the meal capitalism?
We can make it any which one that you want. Let's call it whiteness. We can, whatever framework we want to use. Yeah, let's just use the working environment. Yeah. So in a working environment, it's not accidental that I have braids. it's not accidental that I do all these different hairstyles. It's because I never saw anybody. Not only did I not see many black people in the positions that I am fortunate to be in at the moment, but I most definitely didn't see people with an uncombed, uncouth beard and braids and ethnic bangles and goodness knows what else in my position. And I deliberately go into that space with those things. And to be honest, part of it initially was really just ego, to just willingness to push myself. How would you feel if you went into work and instead of having a high top, you sponged your hair? And
so you've just invented an avatar that can basically navigate whiteness by doing whatever you want, and you see the whole experience as a game, and a game that ultimately you are winning, you're able to win, and you're indifferent on the wider impact. Michael, do you resonate with what's being said?
I don't, because I'm also a graduate of this said coaching course that you went on as well.
Mm-hmm.
And my biggest issue with it was that it said that racism was in my head. Mm-hmm. And that therefore, and I did 3 levels. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. Man's went in.
I can sense it.
Exactly. And I remember telling them, and we have to create this community that, I want to, I had this idea about creating a tribe called Progress, and how we can really educate ourselves to feel empowered about our race, even though it's made up, but really our culture, and feel empowered to be the best we can be, to fulfill our potential. And I said, it's for black people. Bruv, people weren't happy. It's for all people. And I'm like, nah, it's not for all people. Because when I look at the psychological damage that I've been through, and I'm still sorting myself out of living in Africa. I was born here. I lived in Senegal, lived in Yemen, lived in Ethiopia, majority black countries.
Are you on the run? Are you a secret agent? Just for clarifying sake? Because if you are, it's fine. I just want to know so I can amend my speech.
Michael for 007, isn't it? That's what I'm going for. But and that was privilege. That was pure privilege. But it really allowed me to see Africa rather than see this concept of Africa from a European perspective. This is my point. So I got to experience what real Africa was compared to what the perception of, and the perception of what Africa is: poverty, disease, all that kind of stuff. But what was interesting, when I was put in boarding school, and when I was 10, and my older brother and myself were the only black people in the whole junior school, bro. And he left me next year, bro. So we meet on my J's. And it was them ones where I had to steal cream from the Chinese guy in order to put it on my leaf. Them ones, because what I'm saying is that's when you realize again that you are different, you're black. And I'm just saying that going through that school, a very good school, but going through that school made me have such low racial pride and esteem that I didn't see any value in black people. I didn't see any value in blackness in myself. And I remember telling one of my good friends when on my last year of school, I was like, bro, I'm not going to be able to get a job. So when you start your company, I beg you employ me. That is when you pay G's for your education, your kids shouldn't be saying that. Do you know what I'm saying? And that's why I'm saying I think that often the psychological abuse that white supremacy is and what racism is often not told, because black men are big and strong. We don't have emotion. Do you know what I'm saying? I had to actually.
This is coming through on this call. We have Dexter, who's privileged because he wears braids to work and he's got anglicized sounds inside his name. He's completely disaffected. He's not by any of it. You've got you here, who's like African, so that's fine because you're more superior than blackness. Stephen, can you save us? Is there anyone that has any compassion for the experience of black people, or are we all just literally coasting and full of shit?
No. It's difficult, and it's always been difficult. And I feel like a lot of us have just normalized the effect it's had on us.
Do you feel like that's being conveyed on this call right now? If I was like a supporter of Dope Black Dads and I was like, oh, this is interesting, why do you guys need to exist? Would that be clear on the back of this call, what the experience is, why people are marching, why people are so frustrated, why people have down tools on a Tuesday? Do you think that's being conveyed as we now, or are we over intellectualizing it? Are we not? Is it not affecting us individually in the room?
as a slight elder, I wasn't going to go on any marches. You know, my days of marching are well and truly over. However, I'm in full support of any young person going out there wanting to catch COVID, you know, for the sake of feeling the way they're feeling. You know, my son was in Whitehall on Sunday, and my younger cousin was in Hyde Park, and a lot of young people that I've worked with. And I commend them going out there to protest, you know, because at that age, that's how you feel. You are angry, you know, you're in a rage, and you just want to let everybody know that.
So are you
know,
saying you're too old to care about Black lives? I'm really trying to get a like succinct.
No, I'm not saying
You're 40.
say that I can't go out
I'm not going out there. It's raining today. People are getting stuff thrown at them.
No, I've marched. I've done my marching. You know,
What?
so it's like.
What are you saying? I think I've curated the most disaffected room in the history of Black oppression. So we have,
No,
I'm too old, my knees hurt. I have braids and I'm anglicized and Jamaican. And then we have, I'm African. None of you are affected by this. So there's
right. Let me put it into context.
Undo.
I'm hopeful.
Fine, let's all go back to work.
I'm hopeful that just through conversations with young people, and I'm talking all ages, that they've realised that things need to change, and we can't wait decades and centuries.
But how do we get change? We've got the ears of the people right now. This is to anybody. We have the ears of people right now. We've created a pause moment or a thinkable moment for our community. And so there's a work stream that we could go on to in terms of improving our outcomes. And there's a work stream that non-Black people can go on in terms of being supporters, allies, funding, whatever. But I don't feel like this is being clearly conveyed. I feel like we're just saying we're actually okay. So if we're okay.
Okay.
I think two things. First thing, you know, what we need to do, number one, is we need to decolonialize our minds. We need to get rid of all the shit that has been put in there through an education process that basically encourages white supremacy. That's what it is. That's the first thing. And how do you do that? The first thing you understand is everything you thought was bad in terms of African religions, Black women, Black men, all the kind of stuff, you need to get it out. And the way you do that is through knowledge of self and education. I keep saying, one of the reasons why I started studying African history was for psychological well-being, because I've been acting in such an anti-Black way that it was actually, I was not giving my potential to build a Black community. That's the first thing. So education, African history, African everything, in terms of understanding a real Africanness and Blackness is important. Two is we need to stop just sending a tweet, sharing image and say, that's a shame. We need to start building. Marcus Garvey said race first. Let us build institutions that literally can look after our children's children, our children's children's children. I keep saying the reason why the British ruled the world isn't because they were, you know, the best at anything. They had good military in terms of navy, but what they did secondly was they institutionalized the world's knowledge. If you Google how many royal institutions there are now, over almost 1,000 royal institutions, from geography to astronomy to art, and that means that even when the first person that laid the first brick dies, there is a whole institution to shape that discourse and make sure and lobby the powers that be to make sure that that subject area, that industry survives. And Black people need to start investing in building stuff, building schools, building businesses. And I always say, start with this. I call it the £50 Black tax. Commit to spending £50 a month, yeah, and give £10 to 5 organizations. Don't Black Dads should be one of them. Kawanda should be another one. Give £10 to a supplementary school that's going to educate your kids in a way you want educated. In other words, putting Blackness back into the curriculum. These are things we need to do, not about sending a tweet and going to marches. We need to start building.
Cool. Dexter, do you have any final thoughts about how amazing your life is, just to share with the room?
Well, you know, being a privileged Black man who is suddenly Jamaican,
I made you Jamaican because it's funnier than where you actually are from. I'm sorry. I need to diversify because he was African. But it's all the same though. It's a parish. It's a parish in Jamaica, and we thank you for your hard work in building the Jamaican brand.
Of course, Bob Marley, innit? So the point I wanted to make was that if you ask, we kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent, to be fair, because there's like a duality to what's happening, at least for myself. I've got to speak for myself, wherein there's what's immediately in front of me as someone who's in lockdown still, surrounded by my family and dealing with the various pressures of being a father and a protector and a provider and a husband, you know, and also looking after my wider family. And then at the same time, receiving all of this very, very powerful and challenging information, which is coming in waves. It's one wave after another wave after another wave. And, you know, you've managed to avoid seeing some of the incidents that are being played almost like adverts. But, you know, every now and then you'll get a text message or a WhatsApp or etc. And, you know, you'll click download. And if you see a police officer, you've got to pause immediately, because you've got to find out what is it that you're showing me, because not everybody thinks that these types of things should come with some sort of warning beforehand, because it's deeply disturbing. It's shattering. You know, and for some of us, it's very difficult to have a timeout. You know, like, so when the mortgage company contacts me, I don't get to have a timeout. I get to deal with the phone call. If my wife's having a meltdown because the kids are bouncing off the walls, I don't get a timeout. I get to be the supporting hand, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I won't bore you with it, but the point is there's this immediate reality, and then there's something which is just far more significant, far deeper, and it's connecting clearly millions of lives around the world. And I mean, yeah, we kind of went off on a tangent initially, but that
we got 1 minute. Stephen, do you want to share your final thoughts? Because we got a wrap. We've got lots of people in the waiting room wanting to join and hang out.
You got another one, Cam. My final thoughts are: there's always hope, and I'm glad that we have this platform, or many platforms, to actually talk about how we feel, rather than other people telling our stories. You know, it's the first time in many, many decades that people are telling the world how they feel and how they felt for many, many centuries. So I'm glad that's happening. If anything else.
I think one of the things that's really present to me is that in our spaces, there is a much shorter time span for frustration to last. And I appreciate some of us are graduates, but I think masculinity is definitely kicking in, and people are trying to push away the feeling of helplessness or the frustrations that they have about what they've experienced, and now moving into this practical element of I must do something. And I think that's also unhealthy on us. I think that's a part of the reason why we never fully grow, because we haven't even healed from the first trauma, let alone the 1,000, 1,500. And we're now, again, instead of taking time to reflect and empower ourselves with education and time and strategy, we're immediately trying to create something brand new out of this moment. And I feel like whatever we create in this traumatic time will have remnants of the trauma in it. And that's not a way to move powerfully forward. So my thing is that absolutely is devastating and it's very frustrating and challenging. I want to sit in how I feel about it rather than give it a tremendous amount of meaning and try to create actions off the back of it. So we'll see what the future holds for all of us, really. And I think it's in some ways empowering to hear you guys speak in a passionate way, but also not necessarily overly affected. But for those people who are deeply affected, I really am present with them, and I feel deeply connected to the experience that they're going through, and I'm looking for ways to improve their outcomes as well. I think that's a part of my personal work stream. So, by the way, guys, thank you so much. We have to go. I very much appreciate you joining us, and we'll be back again next week.